I'll assume you all know nothing. So bear with me, I'm just going to start BMS up again, and then we'll get into a cockpit. If you go to Tactical Engagements at the top left, and then select, select Ground Ops, and then hit Commit. You will see a screen with a map in front of you, and you will see missions at the top left, and you'll see a box with Patrol, DCA, and Training. We're going to select our aircraft now. I think we're currently assigned to A-10s by default. We don't want that, we want the F-16. So select the Training mission from the missions list, and you will see a little picture of a blue F-16 below, and it will have unassigned next to it. Click that blue F-16 and it will have your name under the plane, and that's you assigned to that aircraft. And once you've done that, hit takeoff, and then select taxiway. Once you've done that, you'll get a 30-second timer. Just wait until that 30-second timer has elapsed and you will find yourself in the cockpit. Just check in with me as well once you're in the cockpit, please.
Are we doing a ramp start today?
No, we're not going to be covering ramp start.
All right.
If you want to learn ramp start, I would recommend Krause's video tutorials. That's the best way to do that sort of thing. Or even better, some sort of printout. If you can print out a manual, print out a the best way to learn thing.
Yeah, okay. I printed out a ramp start checklist. I did it a couple of times, but I forgot again.
You and me both. Okay, I'm in cockpit.
Same from me.
Waiting.
Yep, I'm in cockpit.
In the aircraft.
Still waiting.
Is anybody not in the cockpit?
Yeah, me.
Not yet. Over about 100%. I'm in.
Is anybody else not in? Okay, it sounds to me like everyone's in the cockpit. So, if you hold your right mouse button down, you can move your view around, you can zoom in with your mouse wheel. That's probably the easiest way to follow me right now, but if you are using Track IR or similar, I guess you can just strain your neck. Is anyone not able to move their view around?
Goblox is not able to, but I think it's because of Track IR.
Yeah, that's probably it. What can I suggest? So BMS should work with Track IR straight out of the box. As long as you got your Track IR set up and working, you should be able to just look around with that. Are you able to do that?
Yeah, it looks like the program hanged. I have a custom DIY.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I would suggest either turning off your free track or whatever else you're using and rejoining us, or alternatively get your setup working and rejoin us. I'm going to carry on, but you should be able to pick up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm all set now.
Okay, great. So if you look right over your left shoulder and down, you will see a big green tank. It reads breathing, non-shat. I don't know what the shat stands for, maybe shatter, who knows. But look at that tank, and then we'll look at the control panels just next to that tank. So, just next to the tank, we have the test panel. It's all functional, but it's not all very useful. This will just test various parts of the avionics system. The only sort of interesting button here, and I use it just to get people pushing buttons, is the button in the top right corner. It reads MAL and IND-LTS. That's malfunction and indicator lights. And if you hold that button down, the cockpit will go absolutely nuts, and Bitching Betty will have a fit at you.
Sorry, I have lots to interrupt. My plane is running away. Where's the fucking brake?
Okay, the brakes on the left-hand side, just left of your, just left of you, I guess. You'll see your landing light indicators. You will see a parking brake just below those.
Just put it one step up?
Yeah, one step up.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
You might need to keep clicking it up. It might auto turn itself off if you're moving very fast.
Alright, no, works perfect.
Perfect, okay. You might have some problem with your throttle not being quite on idle there. Yeah, but there's a parking brake if anyone else was having that trouble. Okay, so back to where we were. We've got that test panel, the MAL and indicator light test button. Feel free to hold that down, and you'll just have lots of lights flashing at you. Next to that, we have the FLT control panel. This is the control panel for the flicker system. The F-16 is entirely fly-by-wire, and the fly-by-wire system often has problems. It will especially have problems when your aircraft becomes damaged, and so the important switch on this panel is the flickers reset switch, FLCS reset switch. If you don't do it now, but if you hit that reset switch, it's a momentary switch. It will head up and then head back down, and it will reset the flight control computer. It takes around 4 minutes to reset, and that will usually fix any errors you have about the flickers system, unless you're especially badly damaged. You might also want to know about the alt flaps extend switch at the top there. That will manually extend the flaps. Usually the flaps are controlled by the fly-by-wire system, and you don't need to worry about them, but you can manually extend them if you're doing a belly landing, if you're doing a gear-up landing. Just below that is the manual trim panel. This is not the main way of trimming the aircraft. We haven't set up controls for it today, but usually the aircraft is trimmed by HOTAS, but you can also trim the aircraft via the manual trim panel.
Sorry, is the rudder trimmed by HOTAS as well, or on that panel?
Rudder trim is... Oh, that's a good question. You know, I don't know the answer to that. I suspect your trim is not done by HOTAS. I suspect that can only be done by the manual trim panel.
All right.
Moving on, you will see the fuel panel. The two important buttons on this panel are the fuel master switch, which will completely cut fuel to the engine, and your engine will turn off, and also the air refuel open switch. This will open a little port just behind your canopy. That's used for air-to-air refueling. Just below that is an auxiliary comms panel. This is an auxiliary comms panel, but you do need this panel turned on in order to use comms at all. It's part of a startup procedure. Aside from that, you're very rarely going to use this panel. I'm not going to go into details about it. Just below that, you will see the lighting EXT panel, the external lighting panel. The two important switches on this are the switch that reads flash and steady. If you right-click the flash steady switch, it will go into steady, and if you look out your cockpit, you'll notice that your lights are now not flashing. Apart from your strobe light, the lights are steady. It is considered polite in the multiplayer community to set your lights to steady and not flash, because AI aircraft always have it on flash, and if all humans have it on steady, it's just a handy way of telling humans from AI aircraft. The other switch is the master switch. If you right click that, it'll turn off all your external lights, including your strobe. Moving up, we have the EPU panel, and below that the ELEC panel, the electrical systems panel. I'm not going to cover these today. These are just part of the startup procedure for the most part. Below that, you have the AVTR panel. This is pretty important. So if you want to record tracks in BMS for you to later view using TACView, if you already use that program, you record these tracks by turning on the main AVTR switch, and it will start recording a track. Bear in mind that these tracks can reach several gigabytes in size, so you might not want to record for more than an hour or so.
So is it recording on the same hard drive my BMS is installed to?
Yes, it does. It records to Falcon BMS / AMCI off the top of my head. In the settings, you will also find a maximum file size for tracks. I think by default the maximum file size is 256 megabytes. After it reaches that, it'll just start recording a new track. You don't get any lag or hang-ups from that, but it does mean that your TACView tracks are split up, so you might want to increase the maximum file size in settings.
Okay, and on the panel, set the switch to auto or on?
You need to set it to on to completely record. If you set it to auto, then it will only record a few seconds after you launch missiles, and it will record a few seconds after you use guns, which isn't really useful for TACView.
Yep.
Next to that panel, we have the ECM panel. The electronics countermeasures system in BMS is not fully modeled. It's still a classified system, even though all the details are out there in public. But the operational switch on and off, that doesn't turn the ECM on and off. It just puts it into an operational mode where you can then later turn it on with the button that we set up earlier. Next to that, there's an audio panel. So the important thing about this audio panel is that the settings you make in this audio panel are saved permanently. So if, for example, you turn COM2 all the way down, then the next time you fly multiplayer, you can't hear anyone on comms, and you're wondering why you can't hear anyone on comms. It's because that COM2 setting, that saves itself from flight to flight. The same is true of the missile turn setting, MSL, and the threat setting. That's for the RWR, which I'll cover a little later on. We have a few other switches, another comms panel up there, but the important switch on this side is the manual pitch switch. It's at the very top left. It has two settings, override and normal. Can anyone not find this switch? Perfect. So the FLICUS, the fly-by-wire system for the F-16, has a bug in the software, essentially. It doesn't understand how to get out of flat spins. And the F-16 can get it into a flat spin, and nothing you do will be able to get you out of a flat spin. You need to turn on the manual pitch switch to get you out of that flat spin. That is the only real use of the manual pitch switch. And believe me, the first time you get into a flat spin, you will completely forget where the manual pitch switch is, and you will hit the deck. But the second time, you will remember where that switch is. Moving up, we have at the very far left, you can only just see it. It's a grey handle labelled gear. This is the emergency gear release switch. Having hydraulic failures is a pretty common occurrence if you take light damage, and holding the emergency gear switch will permanently lower your gear. Once you've pulled that handle, you cannot raise the gear any longer. Just above that switch, you will see a yellow thing. This is called the spider, and this is what opens and closes the canopy. don't do it now, really don't, because it's going to be really, really loud if you open the canopy and you won't be able to hear me, but you will see a click point that your mouse snaps to somewhere near the spider. Just below the spider, you will see a panel that's labeled 3 amp. We're going to come to this panel later. It's an important panel, but we'll get to it a little later on. Just to the right of this, you will see the HMCS panel, the Helmet Mounted Queuing System panel. It's only got one dial on it, labeled Symbology. If you go ahead and spin that dial all the way on, nothing will happen because we're in an early version of the F-16. If we're in a later version of the F-16, then spinning this dial all the way on will turn on the HUD that's within the helmet. It's a really useful HUD. You can do look and lock with it. You can look at a target that's off your bore sight. It's certainly off your HUD, and you can lock it up just by looking at it. It's a really handy feature on the F-16. Above that, we have a panel for the countermeasures. I'm not going to go into this panel in detail just yet. Just above this, we have the gear lever, we have the landing lights, we have the parking brake, which we've already found. We also have the stores config switch. We'll be in Cat 1 right now because we have no bombs and no fuel tanks on. If we had bombs and fuel tanks on, we'll be in Cat fly-by-wire system will let you pull. That said, you can over-G yourself even if you have that switched set to Cat 3. It's still very possible to pull 7 or 8 Gs, and if you do that, your wings will fall off, your bomb load will fall off, you'll have a really bad time. So just because you're in Cat 3, don't think you can yank the stick around. It just makes it all a little more gentle. Just to the left of the landing gear lights, we have the emergency stores jettison. It's a little piece of glass that you need to break. You'll have a button for it, hopefully, set up somewhere. You need to hold that button for about 2 seconds for the emergency stores jettison to kick in. So, just above the landing light indicators, we have a panel labeled MISC. This is the autopilot panel. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to learn, but if you just play around with it a little later, you'll get the hang of that. Above that, we have the master arm switch and the laser arm switch. These should be pretty self-explanatory. Above that, we have a button, a switch that's labeled quiet. This switch, how to explain, it turns off different radio emissions from the F-16, but it is not a useful switch to use. There are other ways to make yourself quiet on radio emissions. I don't recommend using that switch. I recommend finding out about the other ways to use it. So, moving on, you will see a RWR. It's a large green circle with a cross in the middle of it. Does anyone here not know what the RWR is?
I do not know.
Okay, so I'll come back to that very shortly. I'll come back to the RWR. Moving on, we have what looks like a old-fashioned telephone right in the center below the HUD. It's got numbers 1 to 0, 1 to 9, 1 to 0. And COM1, COM2, IFF, LIST, AG, AA. This is known as the ICP, and just to the right of the ICP, you will see a little display panel. It will currently say UHF 15, VHF 6. So this is the display panel, and the ICP is the entry panel. These are part of the same system. This has all sorts of functions that I'm not going to go into in detail, but I'll cover just one of them for now. We're going to change our VHF channel. You'll see that by default you are on VHF 6. Let's change that to VHF 7. So to do this, hit the COM2 button, and you'll see that the panel on the right, the DED, the data entry display, changes to VHF with 6 underneath. If you then press 7 and then press enter, you will see that you've now switched to VHF7. That's your very high frequency comms. Has anyone not managed to do this? Perfect. The ICP has all sorts of functions. It's well worth reading up about a few of them. But to be honest, the most common functions you're going to use on this are changing radio channels and changing steer points. I'll go through changing steer points while we're at it. Steer points are your waypoints, what you fly towards. You will see on the DED, it currently says STPT1 at the top right, steer point 1. If you want to change it to steer point 2, the easiest way to do it is with the rocker switch at the bottom left of the ICP. You will see a two-way rocker switch. If you hit it up a couple of times, you can change to steer point 4, steer point 2, and so on. Can anyone not do this? Fantastic. I'm going to leave the DED there. I'm also going to leave all the dials below the DED alone, all those analog dials. These are your airspeed, your altitude, your artificial horizon, and your compass. I'm going to leave all of these alone for now because we're going to deal with the HUD a little later, and all of these are on the HUD in some other form. You can learn about these in your own time. Just below the data entry display, you'll see another artificial horizon, and just to the right of that, you will see the fuel flow meter. I really wish the MiG-21 had a fuel flow meter. This is a super handy thing to have because at idle, we burn around 7,000 pounds of fuel per hour. But if we have our full afterburner on, we can be burning up to 70,000 pounds of fuel per hour. And the F-16 does not have a very long range, at least not without drop tanks. You can burn off all your fuel within 7 minutes, I imagine. Probably a good bit less than 7 minutes if you're using your afterburner on the deck. And so it's good that this fuel flow meter is right up at your eye line, so you can keep an eye on how much fuel you're burning.
Sorry, how much are you burning right now? Because I'm not sure I'm at idle actually.
So I haven't moved my throttle, and it always shows 000 when you haven't moved with your throttle. If I move my throttle a little, let's see. Oh, look at that. I've managed to kill my engine. That wasn't intended. I guess I've not got a idle limit set on my throttle. Ha! Yeah, you should be burning around 4 to 6, maybe 700 pounds per hour at idle.
Really? I'm burning 1,100 right now.
That's a little high. You might want to check your joystick's configuration. Yeah, 1,100. Oh, okay, everyone's the same. Yeah, maybe that's changed in the last patch. If everyone's the same, I guess that's a normal reading.
I'm rolling when I turn off my parking brake and the other guys are not, so I think there might be something wrong.
You will probably roll a little bit without your parking brake on, even when the engine's idle. It produces quite a lot of thrust even when the engine's idle, and it's enough to push you forward a little bit. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
All right.
Moving on the right-hand side, we have 4 dials, all of which refer to the engine. I'm not going to go into too much detail about any of these. The NOS position open dial, that's a useful dial if you're not sure if your afterburner is on or not. If your afterburner is fully on, then that nozzle will also always be 100% open. But you should know whether your afterburner's on or not, really. Below this, you will see an auxiliary compass, and to the right of the compass, you will see a dial that reads fuel. So the needles on the fuel dial refer to the amount remaining in your tanks. The total at the bottom, the numbers at the bottom refer to the total amount of fuel in all of your tanks combined. It is pretty difficult to tell whether you have fuel left in your drop tanks in the F-16. You really have to learn the fuel totals for the different states of the drop tanks to be able to do that. Moving on, we have a fault panel below that, we have a clock below that, we have the sensor panel switch below that, sorry, sensor power switch, just to the right of a joystick. We have the HUD display panel just below that. None of this is especially important unless you're doing startup, so I'm not going to cover it here. We have the cockpit lighting panel just below that, again, not important unless you're doing startup. Just below that, there is a panel that is almost completely obscured by the armrest. If you are learning cold start, if you're learning ramp start a little later, you should be aware that unless you're using track IR, there is a switch that is completely obscured by that armrest that is required in the startup. If you move your mouse around the armrest, you will see that your mouse snaps to that switch eventually. You just got to sort of learn that switch if you don't have track IR. To the left of the armrest, you will see the voice message inhibit switch. This turns off Bitching Betty. I don't recommend doing it because I mean, she's there for a reason. But if you've really had enough of Bitching Betty, that's how you can kill her. Moving further on beyond the armrest, we have the helmet panel. It controls things like the helmet volume and the helmet mode. This is completely non-functional in BMS. The helmet isn't simulated. Moving on, we have the anti-ice switch. Icing is not simulated in BMS. And we have the avionics power switch, which isn't important unless you're doing startup. And moving on from that, we have the oxygen regulator panel. The only interesting one here is the green switch. You'll get sort of crazy Darth Vader noises if you hit the green switch. It's trying to replicate the sound of your pilot breathing. I don't know why anyone would ever use that. The only good thing about turning that switch on and listening to your pilot breathing is that it gives you a better idea about how many G's you're pulling at any one time. Okay, in a moment I'm going to move on to the MFDs and the RWR, but does anyone have any questions before I do? Fantastic. So if you press escape and then you press